the rest of them were like, yeah, no, I'm an atheist. I have been for a while.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I
just
thought you were just going
haven't.
to say they like accepted you. Interesting.
Yeah, everyone's an atheist except my dad.
Really? Well, Lynn, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm so happy to have you here today. I know that we've been talking about getting you on an episode for a while, and I know that you've been listening to the podcast for a while, which I really, really appreciate. You've had so many nice things to say, and it just warms my ice cold atheist heart. But that being said, I thought that your story was really interesting because it goes in a lot of different directions, and I'll let you tell us what those directions are during this episode, but it starts one way and then it deviates, but then it deviates again. When you were telling your story, you sounded like it was like a choose your own adventure kind of situation. And so I'm interested to hear you tell the story to see if hearing it from you and reading it from you is the same vibe, is the same voice. But enough from me. Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What are you doing here?
Thank you. Thanks. I'm excited to be here. And yes, my life has taken some twists and turns, and that was accurate because I tend to get derailed myself. So this may be a more twisty, turny kind of conversation than.
We're ready for it. We're ready.
Okay.
Everybody's strapped in. You started off Catholic, right? You were Catholic in the beginning, and then you became a Calvary Chapel Christian.
Yes.
How does that happen? I'm just out of curiosity. That's not something that happens often. What happened there?
It happened a little easier than I care to admit. So, and I actually started as a blank slate, but I was born into a household with two Catholic parents, very devout Catholic parents at the time. And so I was raised Catholic, and I was baptized. I did the First Holy Communion. I did all the things that you do when you're younger.
Yeah.
And so I was really good at the ritual part of it, had all the stuff memorized. And so, I mean, you would think that maybe it would be kind of a weird transition for me going from that to the evangelical Christianity, because it is a very different scene, those two places.
That's all. I feel like one is all about like memorization, pattern, poetry, the quiet, and the other one is like, we're just feeling feelings. We're just all over the place. Woohoo! You feel God however you feel.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, but we moved to a different city, and we're actually closer to a couple of extended family members who went to the Calvary Chapel. And so that's how that transition happened. We just kind of started going to their church, and
your parents didn't go against their devout beliefs, or they were just willing to experiment a little bit, I guess?
Wow. I mean, the family ties are very, very strong.
Right.
I'm super tight with my family, and my parents are very tight with their siblings, and we're all just a tight bunch.
Yeah.
So yeah, we started going to their church, and I noticed the difference, but I didn't think about it. Right. So it didn't occur to me. This was just like a new phase in my spiritual life where, Christ was still there. That didn't change. So that was probably an important thing in that transition, because I didn't question whether or not Jesus was real. You know, he came with us. He was
Yeah.
here in the new
Yes.
place too.
Yeah, I almost got in a fist fight in 5th grade because somebody said that Catholics weren't Christians, and I was
Mm.
Baptist. I don't know why I got so offended, but I guess because my cousins were Catholics, and I was like, "They are too?" And he's like, "No, they're not." And I was like, "They worship God." And he's like, "No, they don't." And then we just like we almost started throwing hands. It was wild. So that makes sense that you would think that you would think God is in that house, God is in this house in a different
Mm.
way. They
Yeah, the
express
sermons were a little
themselves.
different,
Yeah. Did
but
you
yeah,
prefer one to the other? Like, did you think, "Oh, this one's more fun," or were they just different? They were just totally different?
these services at Calvary were much more exciting, and you know, you got the music, and this is when
Yeah.
you're getting the Holy Spirit. You know, that's
Yeah. Charismatic. Oh, yeah.
yes, yeah, and they had good bands. They tried to make the sermon exciting.
Yes.
So, which is important for me, particularly because I was born with narcolepsy, and
Interesting.
I fell asleep a lot in church, so
Oh,
more in the Catholic services than the one where you stand up and sing along.
yeah. Yeah.
But
Me too.
yeah.
I'm not even narcoleptic, and I have fallen asleep in some Catholic services that I'm not proud of, so I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
It's understandable. As long as you are awake enough to say the right thing at the right time and shake the person's hand or do the hug or do, you know, peace be with you. And like, you know, I
Amen.
had,
Amen.
right.
Amen. Amen.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. How old were you when that transition first happened from Catholicism to, like, charismatic?
I was in the fourth grade when that
Interesting.
happened. So I
And
was still
did
young
your
enough that my
Yeah.
brain was
Oh,
still
yeah.
developing.
Yeah, and, did your, like, siblings and the rest of your family transition pretty easily too, or did you notice that they had any different of an experience?
They seemed to go along with it fine, which was probably another reason why I went pretty smoothly into it. We didn't talk a lot about religion at home. So,
That's interesting too.
I mean, when the extended family came over, oh, yeah, Jesus came up a lot. But when it was just the core five, you know, we had other things going on. And
Yeah. And so at what point, because I remember you told me in your initial story that even when you were 9, you had questions. You were like, "Why does God allow things like babies to die and, like, children to get hurt and bad things to happen to good people?" So it sounds like you started asking general questions at a
mhm.
pretty early age. But at what age did those questions start to impact your belief or your faith? Do you think that you were ever truly faithful, or was it just fun and you were going along with it? Do you remember?
Oh, I was in it wholeheartedly, 100%. I was in it. I was going to heaven. I was going to see my family there, all my loved ones, and
Yeah.
uh, so I really believed, and I wanted to be a good believer. I wanted God to notice me and to mark me how He does
Yeah.
in the Bible. You get the marking, and He knows that you're His. I was about 9, maybe younger, but the really strong one the first time was when I was about 9, and that was when it became clear to me that this, I don't know what to call it, but where particularly cancer in babies and very very young children uh, was terminal, and I just did not get that. I mean, people were praying for cars and for the job or for
Yeah.
other things like that, to find your
Yeah.
keys, and it would work. It would work for them, and it made no sense to me that God would answer certain prayers but not the ones where people died. I mean, unfortunately the church has all kinds of answers for that.
God has a
So
reason for everything.
yes, He
Yeah.
cannot wait to be with this kid. He loves this kid so much.
Yes.
He can't give you another week with that baby. He
Right.
wants it now.
And isn't it interesting that God's plan is never for you to walk to work because you can't find your keys? You know what I mean? Like, that's never the plan. The plan is you're gonna find those keys before you leave. That's the plan,
Well,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's a fair question for a child to ask. And did you feel like at the time when you had these questions that you were supported in asking them? Or do you feel like it was kind of taboo that you would ask, or that they would maybe energetically answer them, but just never really the answer that you needed? What do you remember about those?
This was another unfortunate thing that I didn't really feel that I couldn't ask questions. This was more of a personality thing, I guess, for me. I wanted to do things on my own. I was always trying to learn things on my own and answer my own questions, answer my own, or have God answer them through prayer. So I would pray a lot and get the answers that I believed God said or gave me at the time. I knew I could ask things of at least my parents.
Yeah.
I did not feel like I had any kind of access to church leaders or anything like that, but I also didn't search them out.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's always interesting to me too, when a lot of times people have questions in church and they're told, ask your pastor, ask your leadership. I remember that man was inaccessible. Like, I remember it was a big deal when I was in the same room with that man. I don't know why the tips and advice are always to go ask him questions, like personal philosophical questions, because when you're 12, that's a scary person. That's a big deal celebrity person that you don't get to talk to.
oh yeah, that would have been, and that was probably another thing that kept me from it. It was,
Yeah.
I mean, we went to a mega church, so
Oh, so that's
there was
even tougher.
no, yeah, there was no getting in unless you really really wanted to. But
Wow.
again, I just didn't even think of that as an option. I was just thinking, God will answer. I'm praying, He'll answer. That's what He does. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's how it
Yeah.
works.
And did you ever feel like you got the answers at any point that you were looking for? Or was it almost always just kind of, if you did the research, eventually maybe you got the answer or you just lived without it?
It was mostly lived without it and relied on those answers that are just makes no sense now. The God has a plan, basically, and
Yeah.
the more faith you put into it, if you lose your child, the more likely it is that you're going to see them in heaven.
And
So
and that's always interesting to me too, where they're like, "Well, God wants you to see him in heaven." And I'm like, "They can see him in heaven after he's lived a full life and then dies and goes to heaven. Why do you need to see him in heaven when he's 3? I don't understand what the problem is." Yeah, that's interesting too that you were so young and asking yourself these questions. It's interesting and it's also concerning because you're like, "Why is a child thinking so much about death?"
well, that was because of Charlie Brown, a Charlie Brown episode.
Right? Well, and yeah, and church makes you think about death. I remember thinking about death
It
when you're
does, it does. But
its
that was
whole brand is afterlife, you know?
that's true. That was yes. You're
And what was
right.
it what happened in the Charlie Brown episode that tilted you?
Uh, this girl had leukemia. A friend of Charlie Brown's had leukemia. Yeah, this was 1990, I believe it came
I
out.
don't remember that being in Charlie Brown. Whoa,
It was probably before your time.
that's true.
So, so yeah, this came out. I forget exactly when. I want to say 1990,
Wow.
and it was a big thing among my siblings. We actually did kind of talk about this a little bit. So we were all kind of shook by it. In this cartoon, we saw this girl get sick. She didn't die. Spoiler alert. But
Oh, I was gonna watch that episode.
the characters have to deal with this girl having a terminal illness at a very young age. But I mean, luckily she pulls out of it, and it ends with her having a promising future. So they did give you that.
Yeah.
But then I learned more about leukemia after that. That's what kind of sparked it. Is I mean, I knew that she could have died, and learned that others, many, many, many others, have.
Yeah. I mean, kudos to Charlie Brown for teaching kids about, sadness and feelings and emotions. Like, I don't think it's bad at all to do kids shows with themes like that, because I think it kind
Mhm.
of soft launches ideas about loss, about pain. And it sounds like she lives in the episode, but like this idea that it stuck with you so much that you ended up Googling it or whatever the
Yeah, that wasn't a
pre-1990
thing.
equivalent was. I realized as I'm saying that, I'm like, what am I talking about? But what you going to the library, researching it, finding out how you could about it.
We had encyclopedias back then.
There it is. I remember that. I remember go to the library and getting encyclopedias. Those were the days. But I think it's great they taught you about that. But what I think is the spooky part is that organized religion a lot of times tries to mitigate the learning about those things in order to shoehorn what they want the outcome or what they want the response to be, as opposed to I'm worried about death because I saw this episode of Charlie Brown, and your religious leadership being like, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about this girl dying in Charlie Brown. How do you feel about that? God wouldn't want you to be scared. He'd want you to, things like that. It's more like, well, don't worry about it. Even if she had died, she'd go to heaven unless she was a sinner, and then she doesn't deserve to. She probably had leukemia for a reason. God has a purpose for everything.
Oh, well, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
That is definitely a way they could have gone.
And so after that, did you lose faith in the idea that there was any promising future? Or was it more like, why do some people die and some people don't? Like, where did your brain take you from there once you realized you're probably not going to get the answers you're looking for? What was your next step that you can remember?
Well, I mean, I think you need to backtrack a little bit because there was one more big thing before I actually left for good. Well, two things, I guess. But the first was a few years later when I realized that I was attracted to a lot of people.
Yep.
or people, that, oops, I'm sorry. People, I was attracted to people kind of regardless of sex or gender. And I had learned in church that was a bad thing. And what I understood was that God was testing me.
Interesting. And did you feel like you were failing the test at the time?
At first, no. At first, I was strong. I maintained my faith. I was gonna hold strong, and I was determined that eventually I would get married, and I would get married to a man, and that was going to be my one marriage, and then it would last until death, and that I was going to be the good wife in this Christian household, and that we were going to love God above all else. And no kids, though. Kids were not quite. Were never really part of my plan.
You're like, I'm not that religious.
I'm not sure.
I marry a man religious, but I'm not having kids religious.
There was not a lot of discussion about different varieties of identification. At that time, you were gay or you were straight. And so when I discovered at that time that I was bisexual, I just kind of understood myself as one of the, falling into the gay category.
There's no spectrum to it. It's black and white.
Yes, it was. And later on I would find out that, there are other words that I would describe myself as, like pansexual.
I was about to say, I wasn't sure if you ever use pansexual.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so used to saying bi just because I grew up, I was like, okay, I'm bi.
When you started to kind of understand more and more of that about yourself, did that impact your relationships at all, like with family or with the church? Or was it more like two things are true? I am bisexual and I'm also still going to church, still doing everything the same way.
Yeah, I picked a bad one. I stayed in the closet for a long time, all through high school.
Wow.
And that was a long time to me. I was a kid.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Time
yeah.
is long when you're growing up. I eventually told my sister. I mean, my brother, I didn't talk to him like that back then, but everyone knows now. My whole family knows now. Oh, I was also going to stay a virgin until I was married to a man. So just there were a few things that, and these were promises that I made to God. And looking back on that is embarrassing, but it was what I felt.
And I can see why that would be embarrassing, but at the same time, I definitely think you owe yourself an insane amount of grace, because what these, especially evangelical and fundamentalist American Christianity, very uniquely does to people is it puts all of the ownership on the people. So if you aren't, for whatever reason, hearing or feeling or seeing God as much as you think you should, that's because you're not doing something enough, or you've done something bad too much and you need to fix yourself. If you're feeling complicated feelings, whether it's, bisexuality, pansexuality, it's because you're leaning too much into that and you're not, insert blank here, enough. And so you were given this goalpost, basically, and not only is it one that constantly moves, I've never heard of anyone that reaches peak faithfulness. Nobody. And until maybe you die and go to heaven. Maybe that's like the peak. Maybe that's the boss level. I don't know. But it's basically a system where you are expected to be the curator of your own success without being given the tools, without being given the amount of evidence that you normally get for things in this world, without being given encyclopedias and thesauruses and dictionaries. You're just given the Bible. That's it. It's ancient text. Good luck trying to interpret it. But also you're supposed to read it and believe it. But also, if you're confused by it, that's probably the devil. But also, and so I just said all that to say, like, that does sound insanely confusing. And I absolutely relate to the idea of, I am so confused about my feelings, but all I know is that I can at least make it to my wedding a virgin. I don't know what else is going on, but I know I'm not gonna fuck a dude. Like, that's it. That's all I can control. That's it. And also the value that they put on that too. So you're like,
Yes.
I may be a sinner, I may be slipping in my faith, I may be one of the horrible gays, but I'm not going to lose my V
But
card
I'm
before I'm
pure.
married. Right.
Right.
But I'm pure. Exactly. So yeah, like, that might be embarrassing, but to me it sounds like it makes perfect sense in terms of the trajectory you are headed in.
Yeah. It's not just that they don't give you certain tools, but they've got that constant messaging that you're supposed to apply every day in everything in your life. You're supposed to do everything for the glory of God.
Yes.
If you're doing something for yourself, you're doing it wrong.
Yes. And also, from a female perspective, and I've said this before, you may have heard me say this on past episodes, for women, especially in these Christian religions, they make it normal that a relationship with a man who doesn't have to communicate with you, who doesn't have to do any of the work, who doesn't have to put in any of the effort, who doesn't have to ever tell you he loves you. You're just supposed to believe him. You're just supposed to put in all the work. You're just supposed to, it's a one-sided relationship, and it's the most important relationship you're ever going to be in. And you do everything or else it's your fault. And then they wonder why we date these deadbeats, who don't show us affection,
Right.
who don't communicate. It's like, because that was the first loving relationship I was ever in. What are you talking about?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the first one, there's Jesus, and then
That's true. That's true.
God is
That's true.
it's kind of a throuple.
What was scarier in your opinion? If either one, maybe neither one of them were, coming out of the closet, or coming out of, like, the no longer religious closet, like recognizing about yourself that you were bi, or recognizing about yourself that you may not have been a religious person?
Well, I mean, luckily I was born into a family that's amazing. I can't say enough good things about my family.
That's awesome. And that's sadly rare for
It
a lot of these
is.
people that I talk to. Yeah.
It is. I often, because I can't talk about my family without gushing. I can't. And
Good.
I feel bad sometimes about doing that, because I know not everybody has it, and how different this world would be if everybody had even something similar to what I have with the love and support that my family gives me.
Right. But no, gush away. Gush away. We love to hear it. I think people would be relieved to hear that there's people out there that accept their kids and don't reject them just because they don't meet whatever the suspected status quo is supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah, gush away. We love them. We love your family.
Yeah, family, you're awesome. They're going to watch this. So
yay, they're the best.
So actually coming out as bi was not bad. And I didn't actually say it in so many words so much as I brought a girlfriend home and they're like,
they're like,
they act, it would have been the same if I had brought a guy home.
Right.
So that
interesting. Was anybody surprised or was anybody not surprised?
No one was really surprised.
That's funny. I love when that happens. Oh, I thought you've been out. We all knew.
Right.
I don't mean to, dampen the experience of coming out, but we've known forever. Which came first?
And actually, sorry to interrupt you.
Go for it. Yeah.
But yeah, I've only officially come out as an atheist to my immediate family. I have not. I've been pretending with my extended family because I don't really plan to come out to them.
To me, that's a coming out that isn't necessary.
Yeah.
Was I asked to pray at the table a couple Thanksgivings ago? Yeah. Did I do it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well. Nobody died.
Right. And that's always actually an event, the prayer where around the Thanksgiving table where we actually all hold hands and close our eyes, look down. And I made the mistake once of kind of opening my eyes just a little bit. And I saw another of my family members kind of shaking a little bit, I had to turn a laugh into a cough. So yes. It's been interesting. We support them and their beliefs.
Yeah. I think a lot of, especially social media, and this is just my opinion, I think it plants this idea where you have to come out about everything. And instead of you don't have to come out about everything. I hope that anyone who wants to come out as gay or bi or pan or trans or whatever, I hope they feel like they can come out about those things and live their most authentic lives. But It does me no harm to not talk about my faith or lack thereof to certain people. I don't feel like I am being stifled in any way. Now, if they ask, I'll tell them, but I don't think there's a lot of people who ask, how do I come out to my family about being an atheist? And it's if you want to, I'm happy to tell you what to do. But if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. There are certain lines that I think could be drawn where if they cross those lines, I will be honest about it.
I'm not going to Sunday morning church with you. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to Christmas mass. I'm not doing that shit. But I don't care if you do. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Do your thing.
Or if they say something, should I ever bring somebody home that they don't like, or, and they insult this person or something like that, then I won't.
Right.
I don't think I'd stay silent then.
At the point where it's impeding on your personal rights and freedoms or just insulting, that's different. Tell them what you got to tell them, kick them out, ghost them, cut them off. That's totally fine. But if you're just I don't know that I believe in God, I'm going to see my family this weekend. Should I say it in the middle of dinner? I don't know about that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Speaking poorly or treating you poorly or harming you mentally, physically, emotionally, insulting you, that's totally different. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to fist fight in the parking lot because that's just how we do it in Arkansas. Yeah. Do you think there are any people that you know personally that would react differently or that might not be your friend anymore if they knew that about you, if they knew that you were not religious anymore?
I think my extended family members would have a very hard time with it.
Yeah.
there have been rifts over other things between other family members. So yeah, I could actually see that happening where they would probably cut me out of communications and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Even though I would try to tell them, you know, I've been this, I've been a non-believer for about 20 years, and you've been okay with me at the same dinner
Yes.
table. Yeah, I could actually see them at least not communicating for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe eventually they would get over it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But and friends, I've also been very lucky there. And actually, I've been spiritual but not religious for about 20 years or so. When I was in the church and growing up and heard about atheists and or
Oh yeah.
non-believers, they were scary. They were
Scary,
mean. They were
mean. Yep.
at
Yeah.
control level.
Yep. Well, and to be fair, that's the image that they were putting out there too, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why it took me so long, because I thought you had to be yelling, hollering on these call-in shows, telling people how stupid they are, cutting people off. Like I thought you had to be this angry, everywhere I go, like even the grocery store is going to know that I'm an atheist. I'm going to wear the shirt, because that's the image that was projected for so long. And we call it like the angry atheist phase, where you first
Mm.
deconstruct from your faith and you're just pissed off, you're just mad. And so you're telling everybody and you're putting it in everybody's face.
Mhm.
And so I don't,
Or trying to get the believers to convert.
right. And I will say this, I think it is just as toxic to be the atheist doing that as it is to be the Christian doing that. If you're an atheist and you're doing exactly what you hate about religious people, that makes you a hypocrite, right? Like that we don't treat atheists any nicer on this channel if they're acting like hypocrites than, we do for Christians who are trying to shoehorn people into their beliefs or ostracizing them for not believing the same thing.
Mm.
So I don't blame you one bit for the A word being a big old scarlet one.
I eventually transitioned and actually told a few people, I know that I told you I was spiritual but not religious before. I'm actually an agnostic atheist. And they were like, I guess the switch from one to the other of those was not a problem for them.
Yeah.
But for that reason, for those fears, I was nervous to do it before.
Yeah. Do you remember what the final straw was between religious-ish, and then spiritual, and then agnostic, and then atheist? Like, was it just a series of many, many events, or were there a couple of things that stick out to you as like, this was something I couldn't ignore?
Yeah, and that one was actually pretty recent. That was only a few years ago. And that's because I found community online and had no idea before that just what was out there, what was available. I was doing research for my book, and that's when I started seeing all these YouTubers and people in the chat, and they're the coolest people.
Yeah.
And once I got comfortable that I had, sorry, I am a little embarrassed about that, but I will own it because I was scared
Embarrassed about what?
that I didn't want to do it alone. I would only do it once I knew that other people were out
Oh,
there.
I don't think
So
you should be embarrassed about that. That's wise. That's smart. Like that is a smart thing to do, right? That I don't blame you at all. Making sure it works for other people before you try it is just good decision making skills.
yeah, well, I mean, there are people who just did it long before me who are incredibly brave. I can't even imagine what certain people went through to, the first people who started doing it online. I probably would not have done that. I'm
Yeah.
almost certain I wouldn't have done that, but seeing that it was possible and that the people would be cool and would be a place where I could find people like me,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what got me to come around.
Yeah, and I hear often that one of the hardest things for people when they leave the church is losing that community. So it makes perfect sense that you wouldn't want to go in a different direction until you knew there was a community there, because that's what especially religious people who grew up going to church. That's what you're used to. You're used to that
Mhm.
community. So to me, it makes perfect sense that you wouldn't want to venture alone when you could instead see what the community is like and judge based on that. Since you have made kind of that transition, and since you've kind of slowly morphed into this new identity, has anything major changed in your life since kind of admitting this to yourself, or since really just being out with it?
I do feel like I can speak a little bit more and more. I mean, it's still an ongoing process, and I'm still
Yeah.
not very outspoken, as you can
But
probably
I feel like
tell.
on paper though, you're just
Oh, yeah,
just
yeah, no,
like, I was surprised to find out that you were an introvert, because like reading what you write with fire. I could hear your voice before I heard your voice. So it's interesting that off the page you're so shy.
I'm a writer, and that's how I communicate. I
Yeah,
don't communicate, like,
I
face to
feel that.
face a lot. I really have, unfortunately, embraced the introverted life since COVID started
I
when
don't blame you at all. I
I mean,
My face doesn't say it, but I am definitely an introvert. That's why all of my friends are internet people, not real life people.
right, right.
I
I
don't
mean, I
gotta do
wasn't
it.
social before, but now I've got clients who I edit for, but we don't talk. They send me their work and I edit it and I send it back.
Yeah, and you probably
And
email a lot maybe and, like, just
yeah,
write. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But that
so I
makes
can
sense.
write a lot pretty
Yeah.
fast. And
You write with the gumption that I imagine you in another life probably also speak, but
mm,
in this life, you're more quiet in person. You save it for the page, and I
right,
respect that. I wish I could be quieter.
that's what it is. I save it for the page.
Yeah, you do. You save it for the page. My face alone is so loud. I would never get away with being a quiet person because people would know what I'm thinking just from my eyeballs alone. Like it would never work. What has inspired you over the past several years to get so creative and to do things like write Bible fan fiction? You write so sassy and funny, and you write with such power behind your words. Like, you are clearly a person who doesn't get walked over. What has inspired that?
I mean, the answer is I can't not write what I wrote. I
Love it.
once I started studying the Bible, because I started writing my book with no intention at all of using the Bible. I was going to write something mainstream. I was going to write about demons. I was God was not going to be a character in my book, and I was not going to base any of it on the Bible, or I didn't want to touch religion or politics or anything like that.
Right.
It was just going to be a funny little rom-com about demons. But
As you do. Very
that's what
mainstream.
it is, right? And, so once I started writing it, I forget what story it was, but there was a story or kind of a premise from the Bible that I thought, I can put that in there. I just want to check and make sure that I'm not contradicting anything major. So I looked into it, read that portion of the Bible that I knew about, and it didn't contradict it. And so I went online. I went on YouTube actually, and just to get people's take on that, if there was any. And there were a lot of thoughts.
There's a lot of
There were a
hot
lot
takes
of
on YouTube. Gotta be careful.
so but once I was sucked in immediately and decided, since I'm gonna actually put part of the Bible in there, I should probably read the Bible. And and so that happened. The first couple of months of COVID, I was working at home and I had some time. So I watched YouTubers, I read the Bible, I got through the whole thing. And
Wow.
more and more and more, I just decided the story's got to go this way. It's got to include all these parallelisms. It's got to include the things in the Bible that I was never taught.
When you created this project, what was your family's response or your friend's response, or did you keep it under wraps until it was done? How do you broach something like that?
I actually had not talked to my family specifically about religion before this. I mean, we probably
awesome.
had like
Yeah.
our moments where, it's like a couple of sentences in the conversation about religious stuff. When I decided I'm writing this book, I had to gauge where they were at. So I asked my siblings and my mom and well, not my dad. I know that my dad is actually still a believer. He's still a Christian. But the rest of them were like, yeah, no, I'm an atheist. I have been for a while.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I
just
thought you were just
haven't.
gonna say they like accepted you. Interesting.
Yeah, everyone's an atheist except my dad.
Really?
Mhm.
I gonna be honest, I'm shook. That's what. And were they surprised that you were too, or were they like, oh, I thought you knew that? I thought we all agreed on that.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, I thought we were all on board. We stopped going to church a while ago, and that is why.
Without like telling anybody's story without their permission or anything like that, did they like say why? Or was it just like a casual devolve for them? Just like, oh yeah, I stopped going and then I stopped thinking about it and then I stopped believing in it and now here we are.
It was pretty much like that because I didn't
Interesting.
want to press it, and maybe I should have, because I mean, they're like I said, they're the coolest, and I
Yeah.
don't think they would have minded. But I mean, I'm the only one who has. Well, my mom is actually pretty close in this one, but I have this kind of obsession with learning about religion and the Bible. So, so
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
but they
yeah.
don't. It's like when they talk to me about sports, I imagine that's kind of what I feel,
Yes.
or it's like the
Yes.
reverse of that.
That's funny. That's really funny. Oh, interesting. And so I'm sorry, I'm writing this down because that's just wild. And so after that, I mean, I imagine things were a lot easier when you were like, "Oh, that's off my chest." And clearly everybody agrees. Fascinating. Do you find that there are ever levels of non-belief? So for example, I know a lot of people who are non-religious, but they won't use the word atheist and they still
Mm.
feel differently about atheists even though they're non-religious.
With my family, no. We're the four of us are agnostic atheist, and
That's
so yeah,
fascinating.
it's weird because we all kind of ended up in that place, but on our own, and
Yeah.
I don't know why or how, and I should probably ask them, but like I said, it's really my thing right now.
Yeah.
Whereas
I'm
my mom will talk to me about it, but and I think that she is excited that I'm so into it now because now she can talk to somebody about it.
Yes. Did
But
she happen to say how long ago she started deconstructing? That's bananas.
yeah, and apparently it's been a while. Like she was the OG atheist in the family. She was the first one out, but didn't say anything and let us. She kept going to church with us, and didn't want
What?
to disrupt the whole thing. At least for a little while. For a little while, and
Yeah,
then
but that's
my
wow.
my brother actually got her to because he was next. He was the second one, and he's my younger brother, and he says that he was only 13 when he uh you know decided that religion was not
That's
working for him.
fascinating. Yeah.
So he's actually the one who my mom was able to, I guess, talk to initially, and was able to you know he got her to be okay with not going to church. My sister and I kept going. My dad kept going. It petered out, but over a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time. Yeah, it takes a lot of time. Interesting. I'm just throwing this out there. This sounds like a book. Like, this sounds like you're the writer, but this sounds like a book waiting to happen. Are you familiar with have you ever watched Stacy's Mom podcast on
Oh
YouTube with Stacy and
yes,
Dee? It reminds me
yes.
so much for anybody listening who's unfamiliar. Stacy and her mom both deconstructed from evangelical Canadian Christianity and did not know both of them were deconstructing at the same time. And then eventually were like, "Oh, wait, you too?" Oh my, like they came out to each other as non-religious anymore, thinking the other one would be so angry, and then they realized they were both just atheists now at the same exact time, and now they have a channel, and it's just wonderful.
I
That's
enjoy their story so much because
yes,
it is a lot like mine, and I
yes,
believe that her mom came out for, or left religion first,
yeah, yep,
and was kind of, you know, reluctant to talk to her daughter about it
right,
until Stacy talked to her about it first, from what I
right.
understand.
Yeah, hearing them talk about, especially Dee, hearing her talk about like the guilt, knowing that she raised her daughter in that faith, and like she's the reason
Right.
her daughter's so religious, and she hadn't really felt like she believed it for a long time, and she felt like she was kind of faking it, and it's just
Mhm.
wild to hear that story. Do you feel like you'll ever do something in terms of writing your story down, or writing like a guide for people maybe who have experienced something similar to you, but they maybe aren't as far along as you are? Or do you think you'll keep that just kind of separate out of your writing?
I might do some nonfiction uh, eventually. I mean, right now, I don't know. It seems I'm sure there are people who have a similar journey to mine. I hear more, and that doesn't mean there are more, but I hear a lot of people talking about having that aha moment, or the thing that turns their thinking, or that they remember it. It's a big deal for them. And for me, it was not that. I had a slow walk out of religion, and I kind of just realized that I was out when I was on the other
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
So
I wish
I'm
it
not
were like
sure.
that all the time. I wish that was everyone's experience. This isn't, I don't think I'm going to come back next week. Maybe the next week. And then you just don't go back. I don't understand why it has to be such a make or break deal, such a moralistic
Mhm.
for some people. I wish everybody had that experience where they could literally, it's like a movie. It's like, I'll walk out of a movie, I'll walk out of church if I'm not enjoying it, if it's not hitting the way it was supposed to. Do
Mhm.
you have any thoughts or tips for anybody, say they're listening to this and they're like, man, Lynn's story sounds a lot like mine, but I'm not where Lynn is yet, and I would love to be there one day. What would you say to them? What would you suggest or advise in your opinion?
Learning about religion and its development and how it originated and came to be, that I mean, I actually started learning about all that stuff after I deconverted, really. I deconstructed probably after
Yeah.
I left the religion.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the part where I left religion was more like, I cannot worship this God who I learned about anymore. The God of the Bible is a horrible, horrible God. I mean, I was fully committed, and I worshipped. I didn't just, didn't just
Yep.
love him,
Right?
didn't just have him in my life. Like, I was a worshiper.
Yeah.
And just thinking about that later was kind of gross. But it wasn't until later, a few years after I was non-religious, that I actually started learning. Um, I realized, oh, the Bible is written by humans, and yeah, probably not inspired or written through them by God. And so I took a class I eventually called The Bible as Literature, and that was a
Mm,
fantastic class. It
that
was,
sounds like a fantastic class.
oh, I should have had the book nearby. It's a Bible, but it's like, it's annotated, it's got articles, it's got the book that was required reading for that class. It's
Interesting.
awesome. It's called the Learning Bible. So yeah, that's one of the things that I would recommend to people, even if you're just questioning, is because when you're reading the Bible, and I had so many intentions to read the Bible when I was religious. I was going to read it and never did, of course.
We're always like, we'll read it eventually. We'll get there. We have our whole
Yeah,
lives.
yeah. And then you might like pick through a few verses and feel satisfied, and know that you're gonna get to more later.
Yeah. And then you become an
And
atheist and you read the whole daggum thing, cover to
yes,
cover.
yes. So even then, you read the words and they make sense to you. It's logical. Well, let me backtrack that a little bit. So I mean, within the paragraph, it makes sense.
Right.
But
Like contextually,
yeah, having that context with it, learning about what was going on in history and what they actually mean by these words. You're not just reading the story or reading about what they said happened, because there was no way that I was going to read the Bible cover to cover and understand it or get much value from it just by reading it.
Right.
So I actually used an atheist Bible study online through YouTube. There are many.
That's awesome.
Maybe not many, but there are a few, and they're great. They're all a little bit different because they'll tell you the important things that the people in church won't tell you.
Interesting. Fascinating. And that makes perfect sense, because like when somebody doesn't have any stake in the game, they're not going to try and change what the meaning is to be more beneficial for them. Because if you're not religious, you don't have to do anything it says, so you're not going to change what it says to do to fit your narrative, because it doesn't matter to you. You don't have to do any of it, as opposed to if you are devoutly religious and you read it and you're like, oh no, this is what it says to do.
How am I going to make this work?
Right. You're like, oh, this sounds like there's a TikTok trend going around where it's all these women reacting to like when the Bible describes being a Proverbs wife, and they're all like, ugh, like gross. Oh God, no, oh, it's inconvenient. It's very inconvenient.
To say the least, it's inconvenient.
Yeah. And something interesting you said earlier was, you said learn about religions. I didn't quite recognize until I was studying religions as a whole how much the religion I followed for so long borrows from other religions. Like, the Aztecs, their god was born of a virgin. And once you start to realize it, a lot of very, very devout religious people will say that's just proof that it's true. If everybody believes the same thing, that's just proof that it's true. But the thing is, the core tenets of these religions could not be more different. But the parts of the story that make them so intriguing to learn about and to follow are what they borrow. They borrow the parts that serve them, and they leave the parts that like I don't want to borrow that part. I'm going to borrow this intriguing part. Like, oh, born of a virgin, love it. I'm not going to take any of the rest, because that's just savagery. But once you realize that, like, if that's borrowed and they're not 100% sure that's even true, they just took it. What else did they take? Or what else did they borrow? Or what else is fiction? And when you read the Bible from the perspective of like an Aesop's fable type book, in my opinion, it actually makes a lot more sense.
Right.
It does. It's like, oh, you're not saying that literally every human came from the same couple. I get the lesson. The lesson is this. Or you're not saying that, Jonah got swallowed by a whale. It's the lesson. It's the, Esther, the story of Esther. I get it as a fable, but it's when people go, no, it is infallible. It is true. The bush talked. The snake talked. Everybody came from the same two people, and they were white. Yeah. Like, when I was 10. Yeah, exactly. When I was 10, and I had finches who had babies, I had to take the babies out of the cage, because I even knew that if those babies had babies, they would die. They wouldn't survive because of the genetic defects. And you're telling me we all came from the same two people? I'm just saying, doesn't make a lot of sense. But from a fablistic perspective, it's like, I get the story. Cain and Abel, I get the point. I get the gist. I get the moral to the tale. Do you think you'll ever do your own Bible study from like your perspective?
No, probably not. I mean, it's
a massive undertaking.
It's a big, there's a lot. And people are way better at it than I am. People do an amazing job.
I don't know. I've read your writing. You're a good writer. Like, you may not enjoy making like the audiobook version, but if you ever need somebody to do the audiobook version, I am loud. So let me know. I can help you with that part. if you don't mind Southern accents. But well, Lynn, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I've really enjoyed getting to put a real voice to the emails and things that I've been reading and the writing that I've been reading. But most importantly, I really appreciate you sharing your story, because there are a lot of people that are exactly how you describe who you used to be. They're looking for community. They're looking for people like them. Maybe they weren't chased out of their house with a baseball bat when they decided they weren't religious, but that doesn't make the process any easier. That doesn't make it any less valid. That doesn't make it any less difficult than it is. And so I'm really glad to have you on here so that people can hear your story and your perspective and understand that there is community out there. There are people like them out there. There are people of different types and voices and kinds and ages, and they don't have to be that militant atheist we all fear when we're first introduced to non-religious rhetoric on the internet. So thank you for that. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you. And I mean, the thought kind of does bother me that if I hadn't, stumbled upon the community or the videos or the stuff that I stumbled upon just a few years ago, that I would probably be in the same place that I was, and just feeling alone in that, and still afraid to tell people, and just I would not even be. I wouldn't. Of course, I'm still not outspoken. But I wouldn't even speak as much as I am now.
Yeah. And now you are the video. Now you're the videos that people watch.
Right.
That's cool.
And so, so I appreciate it that it's there. And I appreciate what you do.
Thanks. I appreciate you being a part of it. And for anybody listening, wherever you're listening or watching this episode, in the description box, you can find links to Lynn's work. I will have linked it all there. But as always, if you have questions for Lynn, or if you have comments or just things you want to say about the interview or the episode or her work, please send me an email, and I will forward anything you have to say to Lynn, or comment if you're on YouTube. Leave a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts and your perspective. But yeah, thank you so much, Lynn. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. This was great.